Hi, this video is about border detection or border restriction. You could also call it how to make something stick inside the box. I have an example here of an orange square that I move around by positioning its left and its top styles according to the page X and page Y mouse positions. So I'm dragging it on a mouse move event. The problem is that when I approach the right border, the square disappears, and when I'm in the corner, it's absolutely gone. What I want to do is illustrated in the example underneath, is to apply this technique in order to make it stick inside the box. You see, no matter how much I try to drag it outside, it stays inside the box. Whenever there's something about restricting in JavaScript, it often is a solution that involves if sentences. It's difficult to calculate how to make them. So I'm going to help myself with a drawing. I have one ready here. We first have to have a rectangle for the stage or the parent element, the container. Make it yellow as on the example. And another box, a smaller one, that I want to make red or orange so that it illustrates the element. I'm going to restrict this to the x-axis because once I understand the problem there and once I solve it, the y-axis should be pretty self-explanatory. So this x-axis, where does this start? Well, every element in the DOM has an x and a y, and they all start up in the top left corner. So 0 for the container, and the width for the container, let's make it 100 so we can remember it. And for child element, it's the same. It starts at 0 and it's 25 maybe. It should be approximately a quarter of the big one. Maybe I should make it a tiny bit bigger, like this. Now, border restriction. This guy moves around, and let's start at the left first. If its left position becomes smaller than the parent's 0, then there is a problem and it has to be repositioned exactly here. So every time it's moved over here, it's repositioned quickly here. Let's write the if sentence. If element x is smaller than the container x, then the element x is set to become the container x, which in this case is 0. Now for the disclaimer, there is one. I am of course assuming that you're keeping your values inside variables like element x and container x. I could have written 0 instead of container x, but this keeps it more understandable as a rule in general. So I'm keeping it like this. Now, hold on, you might say. Do we really need this left border restriction, this if sentence for the left? If we remember the example from before, we had a square that I moved and there wasn't really any problem at the left border because it was kept nicely inside. And that was special. That was because it was a mouse move event that was assigned to the container element, and every time I go near the left, I'm not really on the container anymore, so it stops working. But if we were dealing with something animated, and I have to show you another example. Excuse me for scrolling. It's located here. We have 3 squares and they're moving around much more freely and have nearly nothing to do with the mouse. But they are very happy to have a left border restriction, otherwise they would be out of the box. So we are keeping the left border restriction. And now let's do the right border restriction. So this guy is moving around again, and this time it goes over here. And let's just see what x position it would have now. The left position would be 75, because it would be the entire width of the parent minus its own width, because the insertion point is here. So the rule would be, if it becomes more than that, then it would have to be repositioned exactly here. I'm going to stretch this one a little bit because the rule is slightly longer, and copy the first if, paste it underneath, and say if element x is more than the container width minus the element width. So the container width, W, minus the element width, W, then the x would have to be reset exactly there. So it wouldn't be more than that anymore, but exactly that. Now, if you were to remove any animation on the y-axis, you would have a perfect example of something that could be pushed from the left to the right and be restricted at the borders. If you want to keep the vertical animation and restrict it to the borders, you would have to add 2 if sentences, one for this situation, going over the top, and one for this situation, going under the bottom. So the first one would be if the element's y is smaller, because it's above 0, than the container's y, then it would have to be repositioned here. And if the element's y is greater than the container's height minus the element's height, it would have to be repositioned exactly here. So what you have is a complete copy of the first 2 sentences, where you exchange the x with y and the w with h for height. Okay, happy animation and border restriction.